סליחה, אני צריך לצלם את זה? אפשר לקחת את הכיסא הזה? תודה. ככה זה יותר.
I'm very happy to introduce Eugenio Echeverría. He is the director of the Latin American Center that he founded in 1992. And he is involved in philosophy for children more than 20 years.
Okay. Well, we have been talking about multicultural education in several of the sessions. And I would like to concentrate, as you see in the abstract, in some of the presuppositions that we make in terms of teacher education. And the respondents are practitioners with many years of experience in terms of teacher education. And I also experience in multicultural context. So I think these responses will complement each other. And we have, what, 2 minutes each?
I have to look. No, we have 20 minutes.
20?
Release the next session, please. I don't have the program. Can you? When is the next session?
This is due to finish at 10 to 4.
Yeah. Okay.
So say 4 o'clock.
Just before you start, I just
We
want to...
started already.
Oh, you did?
So go on, please.
If everyone can just check their bags, because someone took somebody else's bag and had the headset inside, and it's supposed to be written on the bag, Hildburg, in yellow, 4 different times. So just check the bag, that the bag you have, it's your bag. Thank you.
Okay, I think the idea of this presentation in part is to emphasize first the difficulties that we have in teacher education in philosophy for children, and then the added problems that on top of that we have when you're going to do teacher education in multicultural contexts. And for that I begin with assumptions that we usually make that I think the respondents might not agree with this assumption, but I think after more than 20 years of training teachers and of seeing how they are trained in different countries, that these are common assumptions. The first one says that any teacher can be trained to facilitate a community of philosophical inquiry. I want to question this assumption because if something is not teacher-proof, it's philosophy for children. I don't know if you are all acquainted with that concept of teacher-proof. Something is teacher-proof when you give a teacher the manual, and it's like baking a cake. This amount of sugar, this amount of flour, this many minutes in the oven. And almost any teacher that knows how to read and has the right ingredients will do it. That's something teacher-proof. Philosophy for children would be the opposite to an approach or a program or a pedagogical endeavor that is teacher-proof. And this means that the role of the teacher is extremely important. And sometimes we assume that if we have 30 teachers in training, the 30 teachers after the training, they will go ahead and do the things just as they are expected. This is definitely not true. And one of the problems in teacher education, why this is not, sometimes it's not questioned, is that different centers in the world, or even the workshops that are held in Mendham, New Jersey, at the IAPC, they have the teachers for 10 days, for 12 days, and then the teachers go to their own countries, to their own places. The assumption is okay, they were trained, so they're going to do a good job. This is not the case, and we can ensure that when, as we in Mexico do, you do what we call follow-up visits. So after the teachers are trained for 150 hours, which is another question to address, for how long should a teacher be educated in order for him or her to do well philosophy for children? By that I mean to get close to the objectives of philosophy for children, which they also vary in terms of subtleties. But as I understand the objectives is, on the one hand, developing thinking skills or reasoning skills, developing concepts, concept formation, concept construction in a social way in the community of inquiry, and exploring values, and the children are gradually consolidating their own values within the framework of a community of inquiry. That's a lot to say in just a few words, because we could talk an hour about what that means, to develop values within the framework of the community of inquiry. But so the assumption is, the second assumption is that any teacher could be trained to do philosophy for children well. I question this assumption.
That was the first assumption.
And what's the first one?
The
You
first
only put up
one,
one
yes.
so far.
Okay, well then it's the first one. And that's why I draw this, we call it campana de Gauss. You have teachers that in the average they will do more or less well philosophy for children. Some will do very well, and some won't be able to do it. And you find here teachers that have been teaching like that for 10 years, and either they tell you, I already do that, I already make my kids think, or they tell you, I don't think that works. And that's, you have this problem, especially when a large school, like it happens in Mexico City, a school that has more than 1,000 children in different levels, decides that they have to have philosophy for children, and they tell the teachers, it's not an option. You will teach philosophy for children, and you'll be trained to do that. So we see very authoritarian teachers holding a community of inquiry, but it's really a mockery of a community of inquiry, because they are still with their authoritarian mode of behaving with the children, and they call that philosophy for children. In some cases in schools, after these follow-up visits where we see the teachers working with the children, we have to suggest to the administration, please don't let this teacher do philosophy for children, because he or she is vaccinating the children against it, and the children hate it. It's not the same when you see a school where the children say, yeah, we have philosophy for children, and in the kids the same age that say, oh no, again philosophy for children. So something is not going right there. So that's one assumption. The other one is that the skills needed to facilitate an inquiry can be modeled several times, and the teachers will grasp them. And these skills are not simple at all. They have to do with especially the kinds of questions that you have to ask to enable the children to practice and develop thinking or reasoning skills. So first, to acquire these skills, the teachers need to know what we mean by reasoning skills. And there is at least about 30 of them that have to do with giving reasons, offering examples, offering counterexamples, making deductions in terms of two premises. There's some deductive logic, making inductive inferences, analyzing consequences of what one says or does. Well, I can go on. This working with hypothetical syllogisms, with well, many of them. And for each reasoning skill, one exercise I do with teachers is I put them in groups and I tell them, you have to find 1 or 2 questions that if you throw them to the children, they will practice that skill. So for each skill, you have to develop 2 or 3 questions, and then you have to get acquainted with those questions, with the reasoning skills that go with them, and to use them in the classroom. Because what we found in this, which I think are very important follow-up visits, is that some teachers, all they do is, a child says something, like a friend is someone that shares your lunch with you in school. If they are talking about friendship and constructing that concept of friendship, and the teacher says, everyone agrees? Anyone that disagrees? Okay, next thing. And that's all that happens. And in the whole class, if you do observations, that's the question that the teacher asks. They don't go beyond that. They don't say, can you give me an example? If somebody would think differently from you, what do you think they would say? What would happen if everyone would think like you? What do you think about what your classmate just said? Is it consistent with what you said, or is it different? All these questions are the skills that the teacher needs to facilitate. On top of that, if we are talking about philosophy for children, the teacher should know what is philosophy and should know some philosophy. Because again, in this follow-up visits, one exercise after they have been trained for 150 hours, and you go there 6 months later, and you ask the teachers what is philosophy, and some of them don't know an answer, don't have an answer. Or you tell them, please name the branches of philosophy, with the most common way of organizing them would be ethics, metaphysics, logic, epistemology, and aesthetics. And they don't know it, they just don't know it. The risk is that they, if they don't follow the manual, that's another assumption. We'll go ahead. The other assumption is that teachers will do in their classrooms what they were taught in the teacher training. In the teacher training, we use the manuals, the teacher's manuals with them. This is a, you tell me when I have 10 minutes left, Daniela?
Yes.
And this is a controversial issue because in some countries they don't use the manuals. They use what they call stimuli for getting the discussion going. And I think that's fine as long as the teacher knows philosophy, some philosophy. They don't have to be philosophers, but they have to deal with the areas of aesthetics and metaphysics and epistemology. Otherwise, they stay mainly with ethics. What's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad. And they don't go beyond that. So if we are trying, one of the goals is to develop the philosophical dimension of the experience of the child. That shouldn't be incomplete. So the teacher has to have a sense of what are the dimensions of philosophy that he or she is trying to develop, or help the children develop themselves. And we say, and I think it very rightly that we say so, if we want teachers to do things in the classroom in the right way, we have to do with them what they are supposed to do with the children. So we do communities of inquiry with the teachers in training, so they can live the experience of a community inquiry. We don't talk to them about the community, we engage them in a community. And that goes with the assumption that you cannot teach a child how to swim by showing them movies about great swimmers, or you cannot teach them how to ride a bicycle by showing them someone that won a race on a bicycle race. You need to put them in the bicycle or put them in the water so they can learn. That's the same assumption with the teachers. However, even when the teachers go through many hours of doing community of inquiry amongst them during the teacher training, we see that they not always can do it in their classrooms. doesn't carry over. The assumption is this will carry over. There will be a transference. Well, this is not the case in many cases. The other is what I told you, that they will use the manuals, because the manuals, in a way, they in some way guarantee that there's philosophy going on. Otherwise, there could be nice conversations, like when they come back from the holidays and they talk about what each did during the holidays. And there could be no philosophy whatsoever involved in there. The way we define a philosophical concept is that it's controversial, it's relevant for anyone, so it doesn't have an age, and it doesn't have a straightforward definition. There are different ways of understanding it. So philosophical concepts would be friendship, freedom, justice, what is beautiful, what is reciprocity, what is time, what is death, if God exists or not. All those fulfill those characteristics. So these we find, so these follow-up visits, that it's not the case. The teachers in many schools are not using the manuals. And this means that they are not prepared. They don't prepare their lessons. So we also found that if there's no coordinator in the school of philosophy for children, someone hired to go to the classrooms and help the teachers and tell them, show me your lesson plan. What did you plan for this philosophy class? If that doesn't happen in a school, the program won't really work. When that happens is when we see the results in the schools. So teachers in these follow-up visits, sometimes we get to the class and they know they are being observed. But even with that, they get to the class and they say, children, what did we talk about last time? Where did we go with the reading of the novel? They are reading a novel. So there's no planning. In many schools, I would say in every school that we deal with, about 20 schools, myself I deal with 20 schools in the whole country. There's other teacher educators that deal with other schools. In many schools, especially the teacher that doesn't really like very much philosophy for children, they always find an excuse not to have the class. It's a Mother's Day festival, it's the day of the flag, and we have to prepare. They have to prepare for the midterm exams. They have to, and there's always an excuse to say, this time there won't be a class, a philosophy class. We find that in almost every school. So the assumption that, okay, these kids in these schools are having philosophy for children once or twice a week, it's not true. It usually doesn't happen. And then I will get to this briefly because I want us to see a 7-minute video. And you haven't told me, but you have 10 minutes.
I have still 10 minutes.
Okay.
It's not.
So on top of these problems that...
We have 17 minutes.
Thank you. That we saw with the assumptions that we make, if we teach in multicultural context, we have more problems on top of that. And that those problems have to do with teachers' idea of what a culture is, and of teachers having to deal with children that come with different cultures, from different cultures, and teachers that come from different cultures, teaching children. Culture is usually understood as a set of values and beliefs shared by a group of people, who in most cases also share a geographical location. The multicultural context is one where two or more cultures coexist. So a pluricultural context implies some degree of tolerance and understanding of the different cultures. That's the way it's used, that concept. Intracultural relations happen within one same culture, and what the P4C teacher wants is to promote intercultural understanding. So those are different concepts. There is the assumption that a culture is homogeneous. That's far from true, and we see it in the south of Mexico with the different ethnic groups. Within one same ethnic group, you have different religions, different political parties, and different political affiliations. An example, in one community you can have 3 different churches, evangelical, Catholic. You can have, sometimes the divisions are so hard that the community has a school, primary school for the children of the parents that belong to a political party, and another primary school for the children that belong to another political party. And this is one same culture. So the assumption that, oh, this is a homogeneous culture is far from true. And this implies a lot of difficulties for the teacher working with those children. You have to have added skills to deal with the differences in the classroom. And this is an interesting chart, I don't know what to call it, that will help us to see where we want to go. And we want to go towards the building of an autonomous culture, and the community of inquiry is a helpful space to help us achieve that. So when the decisions in a culture are taken by the same culture, and the cultural elements of that culture are their own elements, you talk about an autonomous culture. But you also have, when the decisions in that community are made by others that don't belong to the community, but the cultural elements that are dealt with when taking those decisions belong to that culture, you can talk about an alienated culture. When the decisions are taken by the own people, but the cultural elements are foreign, you talk about a self-assumed culture. And I guess the worst case scenario would be when the decisions are taken by others, not from the same community, and the cultural elements are foreign also. So then you can talk about an imposed culture. And this, you can find all these combinations. Now I'll just show you a video. It's 7 minutes about children working with clay. And the purpose of the video is when working with multicultural population, one of the things that is very useful is to work with their own ideas, to help them create their own materials. So this video is used as a stimuli for discussion. You can show this to the children, and then you can talk to them about what is sacred, because the man that appears first in the video says, working with clay is something sacred for me. My parents and my grandparents have done it.
Working with what?
Clay.
Clay.
And then what is a tradition? Is that a tradition? What do I mean when we say a tradition? Child labor. Is it okay for children to work? In what kinds of things? Since what age? Gender issues. Is it okay for boys and girls to deal with clay? So there are many things that can come up from this video. The children ask the questions, the parents might ask the questions, and from those questions you can develop what we call lesson plans. And with these lesson plans, the teacher can facilitate the discussion to help them develop thinking skills, construct concepts, and explore and develop their own values within the community required.
11 minutes left.
Thank you. That's just enough for the video.
Esto es, pues para mí es sagrado, porque es el sustento para mi familia.
It's sacred.
Que la escucho, ¿no?
Y ellas son que están curiosas de que la quieren hacer como trabajo que hacemos nosotros. O ellas dicen, no, dice yo, no la puedo hacer como usted lo hace, pero yo la voy a hacer aunque sea un poquitito.
¿Te gusta hacer cajetitos?
Sí.
The girl is saying, I cannot do them as my mother, but I like to learn how to do them.
¿Te gustaría aprender a hacer uñas?
Another question that came up with this video is, can adults learn from children? Or is it always the case that only children can learn from adults?
Las hornean, ¿dónde las hornean?
He's asking, what do you do
¿Me
next?
enseñas dónde?
He says, we put them in the oven.
¿Cómo se prepara el horno?
Pues aquí las ollas y ahí abajo la basura.
He's saying how to prepare the oven and what they do after they are baked.
Su boca se le mete el gancho y luego se pone en el suelo.
Another question is that if that is art, or is it art or is it a craft? And what would need to happen for it to become art if it's a craft? That's another nearby town where the boys are working with clay.
¿Cómo te llamas?
Me llamo Rodrigo Ramos Hernández, Juan García Aguilar, y me llamo Gustavo.
¿Cuántos años tienes, Juan?
12, 11, tengo 11, 7 años.
He's 7 years old.
Al principio me enseñaba mi tío, mi papá. Ya después ya me enseñó don abuelo.
¿Cuánto tiempo lleva tu familia haciendo los?
Unos 20 años. Mi papá hacía loza y mi abuelito también hacía loza. Bueno, antes cuando llegaba de la escuela, hacía yo cazuelitas, pero así personas. Pero no del todo, hacía yo con molde.
¿Y a ti te gusta?
Sí, lo que hace mi papá, también lo quiero hacer. Aprendo más a hacer figuras.
So they want to do the things as their parents do them, and that they have been doing this for many, many years. And they learn from their parents and
¿Qué es lo
grandparents.
primero que se hace para preparar el barro?
Primero se va a traer el barro.
He's explaining how to do it, how to prepare the clay.
Ahí se va a traer los montes con el barro. Le quitamos la piedra. Después se pone a secar.
They bring the clay from the mountains and then they dry it and they prepare it for that.
Y ya que está hecho el polvo, eso que sale, se sirve, se le echa agua, después se prepara con las manos o con las batidoras. Después que lo tallamos bien y se pone acá. Después ya sirve para hacer cualquier figura. Estoy sentando mal. A mí lo que más se me dificulta pues es centrar. Primero meto los dedos y después lo subo. Se sube y se cierra un poco. Pues bueno, y ahorita le voy a quitar la vía para que me salga derechito. Después se le marca aquí a donde le vamos a cortar. Después se le limpia con una esponja. Le pongo así, un sombrero, después se las los chinos.
¿Cuánto tiempo tarda en secar antes de allá?
Un día y ya seca, se mete al horno para que salga ya bien seca. Se mete todo y después se tapa. Y ya después se cuece la primera vez. Se pinta y ya se le echa la neta. Otra vez las meten al horno. Se quema con leña o con acerrín. Y lo sacan y lo raspan para que no se corte uno. Y ya para que salga bien, ya con todo. Y ya después ya la llevamos a vender en la plaza.
Si tú no quisieras decir a los niños cómo aprender a trabajar en torno, ¿qué les recomendarías?
Pues,
What would you tell children if they want to learn how to work with the
que se dan unas
that
clases
machine?
de barro
He said they should take some lessons with someone that knows.
que es muy bonito.
name is first on the list.
Okay, please. I could something you can. Maybe because, please.
Go ahead. No. I'm trying to think of what would be appropriate, and I'm at a loss.
I'll start.
Would you? Yeah.
I also don't mind either.
Okay,
Because I'm-
please.
I have thought.
Okay, please.
I suppose. How long is it?
Yes, we have plenty of time. Please.
Well, I think we could treat this as that, the run-up act is always the one that, the simplest response is the one that comes from.
Can you speak up a little, please?
Speak up, okay. Well, I'd like to respond from the UK context. And I'd like to say three things. Firstly, something a little bit about the UK situation in terms of training and in terms of the cultural complexity of Europe and England. And then very specifically to say something that might be controversial, but about the assumptions that Eugenio referred to. So the UK context, there's just yourself here, I think, from the UK, and it's distinctive. Eugenio knows the situation with us, and he kind of referred to that. But in England at the moment, it would be taken as an assumption that all teachers should be engaged in intercultural work. I think that you probably agree with me. There's several different reports that have been written, and the most recent in January about diversity in citizenship, a review of the curriculum, and this is being taken very seriously in terms of social cohesion in Britain right now, given the fact of all the events of the last few years. So this is being taken very, very, very seriously. And one of the key places that it's seen that this kind of amendment to the curriculum is in the humanities subjects, so history, geography, religious education, this kind of thing. In the report, Philosophy for Children is specifically mentioned as a way by which intercultural understanding, education for promoting social cohesion in Britain today, it's recognised, so we have some degree of status already nationally. However, the P4C programme, as adopted in the UK, began in about 1991, and at that point, teachers were already being very, very heavily loaded with curriculum materials from a big drive in the curriculum. And the people like, for example, Roger, who's here, who were responsible at that point to bring the P4C programme here. Are you happy? You look nervous. No. Okay.
I just wanted you to connect it also to the paper.
Yes, okay, fine. All right, I just felt,
that would
Danielle,
be very nice.
I needed to give it. I just felt I needed to give a bit of background, because first of all, we're not using the literature materials. That's a big thing. So we haven't got the support of the philosophy. And secondly, the P4C training, and I think Eugenio maybe will comment back, is quite superficial. Many, many teachers just do a 10-hour training. So I wanted to use that as a run-up to say that I agree, and this might be controversial in Britain, but I really agree with Eugenio's first assumption that facilitating the P4C curriculum is a very, very difficult job to do, and not everyone can do it. But the second and third assumption and fourth assumption I want to run together, because I think they're even more significant for us in the UK context, is that teachers, they have no manuals to work to, so they have no way of supporting that. How do we make sure that philosophy is present? Well, I think that's very, very difficult, because teachers in England, we have no philosophy in the schools. Most teachers can go all the way through high school and on into the university without any philosophy. So then with a 10-hour training, we're expecting teachers to go into the classroom and facilitate a philosophical conversation. I'd say it's almost impossible. And the bell curve that Eugenio put up there, I would say, was very different. So a lot of people are doing what they would say is a philosophical inquiry, but I think it may be questionable. So why do I agree with what he said? Well, I've said some things here and what might be the way to do it. I think in the UK context, because we have a complex intercultural situation, we have had several waves of movement into the UK over the last 100 years, 200 years, but if we look at the UK situation, we're a country of migrants. We are a country that have been invaded many times, first the Romans, the Saxons. We're a very multicultural environment, full stop. So, if we look at the three aims of the community of philosophical inquiry, which are the facilitating of thinking skills, the facilitating of a philosophical conversation, and then the values education, we need, I think, in the training of teachers in the UK to take all three of those very seriously. And I would criticise the UK training and a lot of the philosophy for children that's going on, in that it is focused almost solely until recent times on thinking skills. And it's seen as a thinking skills programme, and the philosophical aspect that it isn't taken seriously enough. And I'd just like to explore that a little bit more, because I suspect that in a philosophical, in an intercultural environment, because I'd like very much to take that language that Eugenio has explained very clearly, in an intercultural environment, it's not sufficient just to facilitate a philosophical inquiry. I want to bring in some of the things I've heard during the conference here, that actually attending to history is very important too. So I would suggest that teachers, when they're being trained, they need to be much more philosophically literate. And I would like to take this back to my colleagues in England. But I also think there's a degree of historical literacy that is necessary too, in order to facilitate a philosophical conversation in an intercultural situation. And I want to go back to what I said right at the beginning, and I think that it's likely that all philosophical inquiries in Britain are going to have an intercultural dimension. I would find it hard to think of a situation when that wouldn't be the case. So I want to say that all teachers being trained to use philosophy for children in the UK, and I suspect Europe will want to, I could generalise that and say a lot more about that.
Maybe
I won't. Don't worry.
Let's
I'll stick with the British situation then. Is that there needs to be much more in-depth training in terms of philosophical understanding, philosophical conceptualisation, and also a sense of history and a sense of how we've got to where we've got to. So the teacher is not making assumptions, or simply worse, making terrible mistakes and gaps. Yeah, do I have much more time? I could stop there, or I could say quite a few more things.
Well, you want to go on? Yeah, Thomas?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Shall I sit down here? I can. Where do you sit there? First, I want to apologize for being a bit late. I was actually in conversation with a group of the graduate students that Jen is working with. They're going out into the schools, and they're trying to do whatever it is that we're trying to do. And so that's very poignant to get a particular situated context and what their own preparation has been like so far, and to some extent, and how it has been helpful and how not. I mean, as you folks all know, there's so much about all of what we're trying to do that's problematic. And so when people use, when we talk in philosophy for children about philosophical inquiry, in the Hawaiian context, that's already contentious. Because in Hawaii, you have a meeting of Western and non-Western cultures. And you also have an indigenous population of native Hawaiians that were badly, horribly done by European civilization. Practically obliterated the culture. And it's, over the years even that I've been there, it's struggled to get its own language back together. There were laws on the books that you were not allowed to speak Hawaiian. You could not give your children Hawaiian names. In that when you were talking this morning, Eugenio, about laws on the books, it's shocking how recent they are. That some of that steps have been taken to undo or damage. And if just in terms of so there's that. There is the case that Hawaii is multicultural. There's no majority in Hawaii. You have Filipino, Chinese, Japanese, the various Pacific Island groups that are there over numbers of generations. There's a constant influx of immigrants from different places. So
and the indigenous.
And the indigenous, that's right, and the indigenous. The indigenous Native Hawaiians, that's a complex group. There are now immersion schools just for Native Hawaiian children, done in Hawaiian language. And I think I want to speak a little bit to that, because that is one of the contexts in which we have done philosophy for children. But there were numbers of modifications that had to be made in order for this to happen at all. When people talk about philosophical inquiry, when I hear it in conversation oftentimes, I think that it's Western philosophical inquiry that's being talked about. And it's a particular model that, for instance, the Native Hawaiian culture found culturally offensive. Because in the Western context, as I've experienced, particularly coming out of the analytic tradition, but I think more generally Western, philosophy is about argument. And it's a metaphor of a kind of combat. And I think it's very much male in its expression. It's about people taking positions. It's about positions, justifications, arguments. And I think those of us who grew up in that tradition don't realize how much it's cultural practice. And so when I sometimes hear philosophical inquiry, as though that weren't laden with cultural practice. I think that has to come because maybe whatever one's experience has been of it, you haven't been in a culture that finds that culturally offensive. So in a culture like a Native Hawaiian culture, where there is a tremendous emphasis on community in a richer sense than we use it in philosophy for children, I think there's not nearly enough done about community, and it's all about inquiry, not nearly enough about community. And establishing a community where a kind of inquiry can take place, where you don't smother alternative voices. All of that. So the Hawaiian culture that's a fractured community that's trying to heal itself, where there are positions that are very different of child to teacher. Because it's not just child to teacher, and to some extent we encountered this in the Chinese context as well, where you've got many, many years of relationship. And what's the relationship to the student, to the teacher? And what are the implications of asking for a reason or asking for clarification? So if I'm in a Hawaiian context and there's an elder that's there, there's a whole lot of wounding around challenging, or that challenging is the model. From the Europeans, when we were in Australia, and with the Aboriginal community, and one of the Aboriginals saying, "Teach us your secret language." Mm-hmm. I mean, we're Western philosophy and P4C in that Western context is very alien and very other. So when we began working as part of our work with the Hawaiian community, it was when the critical thinking movement was sweeping the country. And the critical thinking movement is very Western in its expression. Giving reasons, defenses, finding assumptions, all that. And the atmosphere in which it takes place is this. So Keiki, the woman that I worked with, said, okay, what we understand is that as a people, we have been very, very disadvantaged by not knowing your language, not being able to do what you call critical thinking, and not, in a way, being able to think critically or do this creative thinking as you call it. But we went through an exercise together where she began to translate what we call critical thinking into Hawaiian. What in English is called an assumption into Hawaiian. What is an inference in Hawaiian? And it's quite extraordinary the kinds of transformations that occur, or giving a reason. It's not like they don't know what that is. This is not alien to what they do. But I would say that the cultural forms and norms that it takes in their culture are different from a Western context. So if we're going to work with teachers in Hawaii and we want to think about what do we mean by philosophical inquiry, we have to have something that we can, that we give names to, it's recognizable, because it can't be whatever or anything. But I think there's really a need to be able to look through different lenses and see, are there family resemblances maybe in what's occurring in the different contexts. So we developed, some language that when we're going to be together in our community, there are certain things that we are going to do, certain protocols, but they agree on what those protocols are about taking turns and all of that. But they're different from what you might see in a standard Western P4C session. Another thing I want to say about working and I'd be interested, Eugenio, how it is with some of the indigenous folks, the Indians that you work with. At a very deep level, there's also a different sense of self and other, and relationship of self to other. And I think, again, and I have to be careful about overgeneralizations, but in working in those communities, there's also, I think, a different sense of self, a culturally embedded self, that's also part of what these folks find offensive. That we just, you have a position, you give reasons, rationale, there's all of that. And there's, from their standpoint, an insensitivity, a lack of regard, a lack of respect for the other, and the voice of the other. It was dramatic when we went to China to work with kids, and how they have internalized a sense of the other, that when you're having a community session, when one person speaks, you don't have to worry about someone dominating or speaking too much. It's that they would be speaking out loud at all. It's like, have others had a chance to speak yet? So the whole ambiance is different, right? It's not that we're not being critical, but my sense of self is much more intimately relational. So that means that the idea, the Western notion of positions that put people in opposition to each other is at a very deep level, there's something not right about this. I feel a kind of violation almost, a cultural violation. So if we're going to do, and I think of pursue an inquiry, and I think what are we going to look for? And the way I articulate it for myself now is that what we're all here together to do is to leave this circle with a deeper understanding of whatever that issue was. Okay. So that we're involved in an inquiry, and in the inquiry, what that means is that all of us in this circle are going to put our best thinking together to see if we can come to a deeper understanding. So if I say, what do you mean by that, Eugenio? Or I disagree with Eugenio. It's not like I, isolated self, disagree with you, and now we're going to... No, it's like our whole effort here is being impeded because it's like I'm not understanding now, and we want everyone to be together in this inquiry. And because you have in Hawaii all these different cultures coming in with their, the differences are all there, it's so crucial that we all understand where we're going, because if we don't all understand in the end we will not have succeeded as a community. So the preparing of people to do this, I think in the end, and that's a whole different conversation, but that they need to have experience with somebody who's doing this. And they have to have had, if they're coming from outside the state and coming into it, they really have to be immersed for a while in a classroom that somebody is doing this, because it's not just a cognitive change. And I'm sure you folks know that as well. If you're really going to, you have to take it at a deeper level. That's all I'll say.
Thank you.
Yeah, and based on that, I just given a paper in the last hour, so that's why I'm a little, I don't know, foggy.
Working you hard, right?
Yeah, working me hard, but the thing is, it's so closely related that I was trying to figure out. Well, never mind. Anyway, in the last hour or so, I had done a paper on the relationship. When you say that we all want to come to a closer understanding in the community of inquiry. Yes, and I agree with you. But I think it's also for a purpose, that understanding. And at least in my view, we want to make better judgments. We want to go about our life in ways that bring consequences that are more beneficial rather than disastrous, right? And that's why this community, and particularly if it's an intercultural community, is so important. And I certainly agree with you that if you, I should have my board down. If you just push the critical thinking, there is a sense in which, over there, you can find yourself talking to no one. But let me just put down some ideas from the other paper, and then let's just apply them to the international, I'm sorry, you know what I mean, intercultural. And it seems to me that one of the things that we try to do in any community of inquiry is, and when I say any, I mean cross-culturally, is, as Khan says, to take a step back, right? To look at who we are and what we are in some kind of reflective way. And also, the community of inquiry is always within a context of critical thinking, creative thinking, and caring thinking. And this involves valuational, affective or emotional, normative thinking, and active thinking. Now, it can be, as I find myself going visiting, that, well, let me talk about what you shouldn't do first, because it makes sense. I kind of used my friend Bush as an example of this. What you shouldn't do is assume that you know what other people value, you know what's good for them, you know why they need this critical thinking, you know everything, okay? But rather, Hannah Arendt talks about using your imagination to enter into the world view of others. So in a sense, when you find yourself in a different context, it's so important to immerse yourself enough that you have some, as you say, to go to the schools, spend some time in the villages, etc., so that you have a sense of the context in which you're working, right? And I think that's extremely important. And here, at times, there are holes, there are gaps between what is the case and what we think ought to be the case. And in order to have this kind of conversation, which is very easy for children in any country, you just have to listen to them. They'll tell you about what they think is unfair, what they think is unjust, what they think is ugly, what they think is just not true, not the case. And so these ideals, in a sense, exist, but in a regulative way. We come at it, someone said, via negativa. I'm all ready to tell you about all the things that I think are unfair. And I'm all ready to tell you about all the things I think are really ugly. And all the things that are really not true. And so these ideals, if you want, are regulating our discourse, whether we know it or not. And of course, the facilitator tries to bring that to consciousness. Hannah Arendt makes 2 points about how not to go visiting into different culture. And one is what she calls tourism, that you assume there's the self and the other, right? You're the one with the goods, and then there are these others that you have to impose or give the good word to. And then there's something else, and that's what she calls going native. In other words, you start to wear the clothes, eat the food, and in the process...
Like 1 minute.
Sorry, oh shit. And in the process, the plurality is erased. I'm anxious. I'm very anxious. You know, that's why the tourist, when he goes to Paris, he jumps off, and what's the first thing he does? He goes to the Holiday Inn because he doesn't want to get too anxious about you know, a different bed, a different environment, etc., etc., etc. And when he goes around town, he goes around in one of those tour buses because he really doesn't want to, you know, get off and walk where the Arabs walk and eat their food, etc. That's one extreme. But on the other hand, if you go native, there's a sense in which you're also erasing the plurality. And so somehow you want to keep, you want to keep the plurality, you want to keep the differences, all right? But you want to respect, as you say, how the other sees the world. And there's no way you can understand that unless you've cultivated emotionally as well as cognitively this ability to get inside something and see it from the inside. You're going to have to use the emotions of empathy and sympathy and compassion to do that. And if someone hasn't helped you to foster those emotions, you're going to be crippled. You're going to be crippled.
Thank you very much. And maybe now I want the last 10 minutes to open it for everyone. And our idea was, or the question is also, how can we give teachers the tools, or not only the tools, how can we help teachers to get into this multicultural setting through philosophy with children, for children? So, please.
Yeah,
I'm someone who's from the UK, and I'm mixed race. I'm British, Indian, South African, Dutch, and in some ways simultaneously Western, and Welsh as well, very importantly. Western, Eastern, and in a very small way you could say African. I'm not saying that this gives me, you know, a wonderful insight, but I do think it has some bearing on how I perceive things. And I was really interested in what you were saying about this idea of, it seemed to me what you were saying is that your own cultural prism might be mistaken for the normality.
No, the absolute truth.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way things are. That's worse.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think when I reflect on my own education, that certainly was the case. And I can look back at a number of critical incidents where it was very upsetting and very difficult for me. Where I perhaps take issue with you to some extent, Anne, is that at that time I was in no position to articulate what it was that was causing that upset. It just seemed odd, frustrating.
If you had a caring community, could we have helped you? Could your peers have helped you?
I think, and I guess that was my next step, the issue is that I wasn't the problem, although I was perceived as it. And I'm speaking personally, not to take on victimhood, but try and ground this in something. But that perceiving the problem as being the people who didn't understand that their way of seeing things wasn't the absolute truth is the real issue. And you talked about how that came through experience. And you know, it was really moving. But the frustration for me as a teacher now is the thought that does everyone have to go through, you know, 10 years of experiencing that, and only experiencing that because they're so immersed in a culture, or is there a way of bringing that about in a more speedy way? There's an impatience in me to, these people are going through a process, and I have to wait till they suddenly realise that their way of seeing things isn't the absolute truth, and then they might be open to me.
One way is literature.
Please.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
It would be nice to hear what Eugenio says.
Could you just do that?
I think it would be nice to hear what Eugenio says, but from a British context, I want to respond, and also with the philosophy for children. I think we're not taking philosophy for children, its potential and the need to make the training very, very seriously. We're not taking that seriously enough in the UK. I think probably there needs to be, as well as philosophical and historical, there needs to be some political literacy as well going on there.
Which is really where I was going with that.
And whether it can be done overnight, I don't know. And that's why I would say in the UK that 10 hours of training is almost not worth having. It almost is worse, and it possibly, and probably we've got some evidence for this, but I won't say it here, that it's inoculating kids. And when other teachers come and see it, they think, if that's philosophy children, I don't want to know. And if philosophers walk into the classroom and see it going on, they'll think it's not philosophy for children, because what the potential is for the children to be developed personally, hugely, but when teachers practice it over a length of time well, and I wouldn't cite myself particularly as a good example of that, but I'm sure that there's a huge amount of personal transformation that is the kind of personal transformation required of the teacher to do this well.
Yeah, I agree with what you are saying about different cultures. In the Indian communities, there's a sense of us as a community. For example, Indian from Mexico, North Indian from when somebody commits a crime, they don't deal with the concept of punishment. They deal with the concept of restitution. And the crime affects the community. They don't say, Juan, committed a crime. So there's something wrong with us as a community, and we need to get it straight. So that brings up, as I was saying, more challenges in terms of teacher education. It seems to me, from what Pat is saying, I agree, that it's not given enough importance. What you say is wonderful, but it's in theory. How do you take that to train teachers? And sometimes I even feel that the pedagogical and psychological, because group control is very important. If the kids are killing each other, you cannot work, or insulting each other, or not listening to each other. that's pedagogical, and you have to know some psychology and handling of groups. And it seems to me that sometimes that's dismissed as, oh no, that's the lesser thing, you know, it's a philosophical one, more important. And here we are with the theory, but we don't give importance to the, how are we going to ground that theory into strategies, sound strategies for teacher education. That was my main point.
Can you repeat the question again? I wanted to hear the phrasing of your question one more time before I articulate my answer.
Well, what could we do to, in teacher training, that teachers in an intercultural environment would become better, which tools do they need to be good teachers of doing philosophy for children in an intercultural environment?
Okay, sure. To directly answer that question and to respond to your comments as well. For me, as a teacher who lived in Taiwan for 2 years, and also a teacher and taught and started off with no Chinese, learned Chinese, and watched how I developed as a teacher myself in the classroom through language and understanding. I believe, and then coming to the Middle East and working also starting off without much Arabic, and then developing the Arabic and Hebrew. I think that this was that even after 3 days of learning a language and responding with other languages and bringing a sense of familiarity to immigrants in the classroom, changes the dynamics of a teacher-student relationship in a remarkable way that I cannot comment on in a multicultural country like England or Canada or United States. But this is something that I would, maybe like to hear some feedback on from within the multicultural environment.
I taught for 34 years in primary schools, trained teachers for that period. I taught in multicultural schools, I taught in single identity schools. I think we run a risk, if we're not careful, of just sort of creating these ghettoized, linguistic, cultural groups. Even within any one group, the variation within is as great as the variations between groups. It's about treating and respecting the individuality of the child, but also respecting what that child brings from their community, whether it be their parents, whether it be their faith, whether it be the society that they live in, whether it be the class structures and mores of that class structure they bring with them. And I think multiculturalism is a dead end. In Britain it's become a dead end. It's led to not intercultural relationships. It's led to ghettoization. We need to make sure that we don't go down that track again.
So my question is also, hasn't it also to do with the attitude of the person who is the teacher? I mean, how open someone is as a teacher. So my question is also to Eugenio, what are you doing with teachers that are not interested? Because you said there are teachers that are not interested. So they are forced to do it, or because that's very difficult, I think.
It'll be very difficult.
That's okay. I'm just wondering if some of the things that you brought up are really problems with teacher education in general, because I can think in my school and in many schools and when I study that it's a lot of it's about what we give teachers the power to do, yet how they are not part of any sort of learning community themselves, and they're isolated in their classrooms. And I think some of the problems that you're talking about, I could transfer to history teachers. I did my undergraduate in modern history. I get thrown into the classroom teaching ancient Greece because I'm a history teacher. And so I wonder if some of these problems are actually problems with the whole way education is structured, the whole way teacher training is structured, and in actual, and so it's common not just for P4C, but for so many of the things that we're trying to teach.
One of the things you mentioned, do we have to wait 10 years? Because you have a sense of urgency. No, but I think that's important, because when I think about there's individual cases, but then what kind of structure, you know, as you sort of move out, what are the structural changes? I think that's important about what you've said. And if you think in the long term, what are the structural changes institutionally that would have to take place to put an end to the damage and violence that's being done now every day? And what I've done in Hawaii is to, so I think in whatever location you're at, it's important to, because I started thinking, what depth of experience do we have in Hawaii? Because early on it was like, you know, you train some teachers, they go out, then some more come in, you train, and they go out, and they would do it a couple of years, and then they would drop off, and then they would drop off, and then they would drop off. And so it was like, there's no, so my depth of experience and depth of resources to draw on that we didn't have. So what we've done is, and I don't know, so what you've done is to focus on a particular school and to stay with that school as a starting point. And to nurture those teachers. So we have an elementary school now for 7 years now. We had another elementary school, 11 years of teachers doing this. And what that means is that you have kids that after kindergarten, less the kindergarten teachers, after the kindergarten, then the kids are beginning to internalize, I think, the culture of P4C. It becomes part of who they are. So the first grade teacher, it's great. They can tell immediately who did P4C in which kindergarten and who didn't, right? And as they move along, and then you get a center of gravity that if you have kid turnover, if you've got a critical mass, the kids who come in, well, this is an inquiry community. They can adapt and adapt to that. Now we've got connections with the College of Education. So that those students at the pre-service level, we have to hit those people, and at the in-service level, right? So now people on their way of thinking about teaching can go out into these schools and spend time to decide, do I even want to do this? They can see it in action. The teachers now have their own philosophy for we do philosophy for teacher sessions. They have their own inquiry community. The culture of the school is an inquiry community, and then it moves out. The parents are interested. We do sessions because they see the kids are different. They think this is a different way of relating to my child. I wish my parents had known how to do this. So now it's taken years to do this, but now it's like there is a depth of resource to draw upon, so that if somebody's interested and they want to see what does it look like, I think, or even a new school. Okay, if you're interested, we've got necessary conditions. You have to have at least 6 teachers, and you also have to find time for those 6 teachers to spend a day in that school, see what it looks like across grade levels, talk to those teachers, and decide, do you really want to do this? You see, so I think those are things that can be done. You put people in with little kids, sometimes it takes 2 minutes.
And sometimes
one more.
Sometimes it doesn't work at all.
Just one moment, please. Just 1 minute left.
Because the rank is here and people are waiting for coming. But what you said about forcing the teacher, I think that what Tom is saying is that we have found strategies or ways of doing things in which we know it works. So if the whole school, first the administration of the school has to want it. If you don't have that, forget it. It's even 10 teachers who want it, but the administration is not supporting intentionally, it won't work. Then we train all the teachers. If it's 90 teachers, the 90 have to go through the introductory course. Not all 90 have to teach it. The ones that are really interested, but there have to be enough, they teach the classes. And in some schools, they all have to teach it, but with time, some teachers choose to specialize in philosophy for children. They like it very much. They go to national meetings and international meetings. They study more, and they become the specialist in that school. So they can teach the classes that other teachers would hate to teach philosophy for children. So this specialist comes and teaches because that has worked.
Thank you very much.